Hello, I'm here. I'm so excited I am here. I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it, but the hotel has decent Wi-Fi, so ta-da. How are you? Okay, let's see. I got an email here. Uh, just got an email from Alan. Let's see if he's coming or not. Yeah. Just got your email, Alan. Just got your email. I actually have a related thing to bring up. Will you indulge me? I'm referring to Alan's email about collaborative note-taking and so on and records.
Sorry, I was on mute, so please repeat. Or I had the volume down.
Yeah, you muted me. That's what you did.
Correct.
Oh, we're missing Leon here. Oh, okay, he's back. Right. So yeah, I don't know who will be joining us, but I have this problem for my PhD, which I realize is quite generalizable, and I think it can actually relate to what you're talking about now. And it comes down to the problem statement is that I did a survey for Visual Meta for about 200 people. So I got all these strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, all of that stuff. I got some plain text comments and other stuff. It's a huge amount of stuff. And one of the things I need to do for my corrections is do a bit better analysis. My initial analysis was lacking, to put it politely. I'm not a good mathematics person. So I've been wondering back and forth, and this is where I think we have an overlap, and I'd really like your perspective on this. Imagine if I could take a spreadsheet that has been cleaned up, so instead of, for instance, one of the questions, what do you use to write? I make sure it says Microsoft Word only if it's Microsoft Word. So it's a nice, clean spreadsheet, but it's messy. Imagine if I could put that into Visual Meta. That's the first thing. In a way that is robust, so it can be parsed without page break errors and all of that stuff. So that's an issue in and of itself, right? The second issue is coming back to what we talked about by having code or something executable in the text. So looking at this many, many times, I came down with, I'm just going to open it up again here, an example sentence. Hang on, it's so hot there. Right. So imagine that in the text, there is a sentence that says, what do rows would strongly agree have in common which other rows do not? That then can be sent either to regular old-fashioned code or to whatever AI the user uses. So in other words, there's two components. Put the spreadsheet in a robust way into the PDF. Number two, present it.
You're breaking up a little bit, Frode. At least for me, it's like kind of getting muffled or something.
Really? Okay, hang on. Okay, it was a bit loud outside. Is this better now?
I think so.
I've done voice isolation.
Okay, great.
Okay, so there are two problems here that I think are very interesting. Number one, how do you put the spreadsheet in Visual Meta, in other words, in a PDF that's usable and extractable in the future? And the second half is, and this is where I think it gets fun. So me as a normal student or as a professional researcher, for this case, it doesn't matter. I can write questions in plain text in the paper, maybe preface them with a special sign or something. That's not the point. The point is, as long as that sentence refers to the data set or one of many, I should be able to say, for instance, in the example, what do rows that have strongly disagree in common with each other that other rows do not? That is the kind of perfect thing for an AI to do right now, that kind of analysis, right? And in the future, it'll be different. So how can we join those two things up? Because when you talk about the collaborative note-taking and all of that, you're also talking about different corpuses coming together in a way we can then extract meaning from, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the particular situation you presented, but I can go into sort of how I heard it a little bit or what it makes me think of. Uh, I was just earlier today thinking
Just
through
going
a
to turn
system.
on a fan while I'm listening to you. It's very hot. I can hear you. Just stepping.
Okay. Uh, I was thinking through a system where if I was using Markdown and compiled it, could part of the compilation process make auto links to other entities within the Markdown, right? And kind of create its own ID, for the scope of that Markdown. That's cool and all, but that's not really portable. What would be more useful is when I hit compile, it goes through all the documents that are in that directory, right? And uh, do an AI sort of text extraction of things that were mentioned in the Markdown, right? And link to them. So this is pretty much what you already have with a bundled collection in PDF, right? But the key is that the key difference that's kind of interesting is that whether it's a table, CSV or Markdown or whatever, if there's uh, one area, or just in natural language, actually, one area where terms are sort of defined, not one area, throughout this corpus, if terms are defined in either natural language or by row and cell or by, syntax and Markdown, that gets added into an auto-compiled ontology scoped to that directory, right? That says, you know, um, here are mentions of Frode, here's mentions of VR, that's easy stuff. But if in another place VR is linked to Apple and linked to AR, then that is sucked into this ontology. So now if you're that goes off on some tangents, but what I was kind of hearing is that using AI to suck up the information from various formats, come up with hypotheses so that questions could be asked to it based on what's in that directory, like compare and contrast, how does the sentence here in this row differ, right? I don't know if I'm making my point very clear, but that's kind of what I was hearing when I was trying to put together your point.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is the tricky bit, and what I think is exciting and important. There's so much talk about the data being part of the research paper, but it's always put on some separate repository in a separate file, and that's great for the short term. But for the longer term, there's a chance of loss, of separation, all kinds of issues. So the first thing is just how can you encode a spreadsheet in a PDF in a way that can be robustly taken? That's the first. I'm sure we got that one. I'm not saying we have a solution, but that would be amazing, I think. Secondly, I think it would be really, really cool if there was a way where the author could write analysis questions of that corpus, which then through an action, an interaction, could be sent to the reader software. It's like, okay, this is basically the prompt. The data set is this thing at the back. Deal with it. Because for instance, one thing I need to figure out to make it really concrete is if someone really hated a feature in Visual Meta, and it turns out that it's essentially Microsoft Word users who hate that feature, that's a useful bit of analysis for my PhD, for myself, for research, blah, 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 right? So it's a great example of I have 201 people. But also, if someone just dislikes something, what do these people who dislike stuff have something in common? It may be something that I can't easily see. Maybe it turns out that they also dislike a specific other thing and they're connected. This kind of data analysis is done normally all over the place. But imagine if someone reading a PDF that has the actual data can do the stuff that the author has put in, that also enter their own queries to work on it. Just seems like something that shouldn't be that technically hard, notwithstanding the quality of the AI, which will hopefully improve with time anyway.
I'll tell you one thing that I think would be a fantastic super feature for Reader would be that the AI attached reads all the documents that one PDF is in, right? And now you can have a visual meta in the sense of an interaction layer on top of the PDF that you're reading, and asking questions to other documents, whether they're PDFs or not, you know, and maybe the thing that you're asked, you know, the interface that you're now using also compiles to something, right? Like it could be a markdown file, it could be another PDF, it could be HTML, whatever, you know. But that you could use Reader to get a synthetic view of the other documents, even if they're proxies of the documents, of the other documents in the folder. And then as you're assembling this new document, which is a series of questions and comments based on what has been discovered, that becomes like a superstructure over the folder that weights certain documents or parts of documents differently, you know, and you kind of like compile as you're reading through any particular paper, you're compiling a synoptic view of what's in that folder. Anyway.
Well, no, I think that's very useful. Just one more thing on this. I'm just going to show you what we kind of have working now because it relates to what you're saying, but it's simpler, very much simpler. So here in the background, we have the library, and here we have a document that's on hypertext. So if I now select the word hypertext, I can, of course, find all the occurrences. But if I do this, if I do Command Shift F rather than Command F, it searches the library for that text. So these are the other documents that have that text. So it's a really, really basic version of going from a document into a library in order to, so for instance, this, click on it, it'll up to the right page. Anyway, it is, thank you. I'm just showing this. It can be really sophisticated or simple going from one to a corpus and back. Leon, please.
Yeah, I was thinking that I will not go too deep. First, I was thinking that you were basically asking the question of why do we have to choose between an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or a PDF in the first place? Why can we not start from some kind of common format? But more practically speaking, I did a quick search, and it turns out, and I'm not sure if this is interesting at all, it turns out that the PDF format supports attachments, so you can somehow import these other documents, Excel or whatever, as an object, which I think maybe it depends a bit on the viewer application, whether it can be shown or how it can be shown. But yeah, is that something which might be practical? Because I was thinking that the people who will complain about, hey, it's not this attachment is not working, or how does it work, those are basically the ones who would need it. It might be interesting data, even if it's implemented poorly.
I'm a bit wary about that because PDF-A is the archive variety of PDF, which has no such things. Every time something is hidden, I get a bit worried because if there's an update to the format, it can get lost. You know, it's happened quite a few times, but it is nice to know that it's possible. Of course, there are many restrictions because they're worried about viruses and macros and all of that stuff. But yeah, that's a good perspective.
And one more idea I had, like URLs, there's also such thing as local URLs. They start not with HTTP, but they start with file semicolon. And who knows, you could just use links which then requires those documents to be in the same folder as the PDF. But that doesn't really display it though. That would be more like a link. anyways, that's my few cents.
Thank you. Yeah, and we don't have to talk a lot on this. It's just something that excites me, and it's completely rough and not there at the moment. But I'm just thinking, this discussion, Leon, you're part of this email thread, right? About recording our conversations and all of that stuff, right? This it is a very important consideration, obviously, how we choose to view it later. If it's purely chronologically, that's one view. But as Alan pointed out, it shouldn't be the only view. And I do think there is some real value to developing such a system in an open way, not just how to do CRM to get customers kind of commercial way. And one thing I would very much like for that kind of a thing to do is to obviously interrelate with the other things we have, both the videos and the published documents and so on. It just seemed like such a, I've been working on timeline stuff now for so long in discussions with people, just like we have in this community. And it always seems like some company's going to solve it. But maybe we should incorporate a company called Some Company. Just do it ourselves.
Yeah, sorry, go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Alan.
sorry. No, you go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking, this whole these recent discussions about AI doing too much, and to me it reveals a bit that the jump to these large text models, they basically indicate that we are a bit stuck at having to choose this false dilemma between choosing, should I start a spreadsheet or should I start some document? This week I had a small discussion with my wife about how are we gonna organize our refurbishment project. Are we gonna go in a spreadsheet or in a wiki? And it was really a bit of a sad conclusion that there is no sort of low common denominator where you can later which you can use to later decide, okay, now I want to export this to a spreadsheet, or now I want to export this to a document. And it's very funny that you actually start this sort of question or touch on this topic as well.
I think it's so important what you're saying, and I know we come at it from slightly different angles, but the reason I'm so hot on plain, simple PDF, including what we're talking about now, is because these you need to be able to make choices how to use this stuff. And I could imagine so easily taking this into a VR space, and instead of just having a 2D spreadsheet, you have a 4D spreadsheet. I'm not sure how the interactions would work, but right now I've color coded, normal red means I don't agree, green means I agree, that kind of stuff. Now, to be able to see that in a multivariate thing where you move around, it'll be a completely different shape. And a lot of those interactions we can solve in 2D. But the whole thing that is, I'm a Mac guy. I wouldn't be in this thing if it wasn't for the Mac, because aesthetically that's me. And I remember fighting so long in the 90s with the Windows people because of the secret Microsoft Office document structure. I think it's absolutely insane that for decades, Microsoft owned the document structure. They pretended .doc or .docx now was open, but it really wasn't. So now we're going into VR with all these things. We've got to make it as open as possible. When we choose to, obviously we keep our own data secret, but when we want to publish it somehow, make it actually usable, not just for someone with deep coding skills. And I think you guys are coming at this from a really fantastic perspective. I mean, Alan sometimes does working on paper, for crying out loud. But it shouldn't really matter where we start working. We should be able to transform it, and we should be able to keep the connections.
Ellen, is there any sort of paper physical notation which you might know about, which is kind of designed to later to be scanned or converted to a different structure? I remember, like,
now.
Sorry?
That's what I'm working on now.
Oh, that's the best answer.
Yeah, I am going about it kind of the hardest way, which is trying to make it work with completely unstructured text. Which means like it can go in any direction. It can be it can have, you know, images around it, clouds, dotted lines, whatever. And the ideal would be to take a photo or have streaming video and then have an ML model, or, you know, take a photo of that, shoot it into a model to be processed, and have it translate the text not just as discrete text, but also understand or make a best guess at why these things are spatially located around each other, right? And that's where I want to get to, because that's where it gets super interesting, right? Like sometimes it could only work if the recording was happening while I was writing it, so you could see this came before that, right? So you could see that this idea led to this idea, right? Otherwise, it's very difficult to guess what it all means. But then the awesome thing would be like, could that be converted into Markdown, or a Markdown for 3D, you know, where there's a different syntax than H1, H2, you know, HR, but like a syntax that means these things are connected, but I don't know how, you know, or a syntax that means this came after that, you know, or you know, like fuzzy syntax almost, right? Like really semantic syntax. But yeah, so I'm working on that. There are Moleskine is an example of the notebook where you could write in it and it would transfer a digital version of that and sort of interpret the text that's in there, if that's what you mean. Yeah, I think there are a lot of attempts at it, but I don't know that anyone's actually really sufficiently solved it. Brandel might know. Hey, Brandel.
Quick recap, Brandel. I'm going to get to the main topic, which is now, but previously, I have to do analysis for my PhD. One of the things, I have a huge spreadsheet which has survey questions in it, and I need to find out things like, sorry, lower hand, such as if somebody strongly dislikes something, do they have in common with someone else who dislikes something? That kind of analysis, right? So I thought, why not, in addition to me doing it the plain way, find a way to, first of all, take that spreadsheet and put it in Visual Meta in a way that is robust and extractable for parsing. Then secondly, in the text of the document, I could write questions for prompts, basically, such as what I just said now. Anybody who strongly disagrees, what do they have in common? So that can be run, I will obviously write my result, it can run live by the viewer, plus their own prompts, because I want to be able to move this into VR. So instead of having a 2D thing, it'll be 3D, it'll be a cube. But in order to get it in there, we need to have, first of all, the data in an easy way and so on. And everybody talks about the importance of having data with a research paper. Boom, that was that. And then we were talking a little bit about recording our conversations, our notes and so on, in many different ways. Alan was talking about doing it on paper and so on. Part of that, I would say, relates to spatial hypertext, because he's interested in the groupings and all of that stuff. Groupings in many ways, and this is where it gets really, really exciting, because we're talking about many dimensions. I think time is very, very important if it is real clock time, because if, let's say, I'm writing, you know, I'm in Malta now, it's all very special, it's different, big adventure. If I'm writing in some kind of a notebook, in the future, I may want to be able to look back to, hang on a second, something I did when I was in Malta. Why not encode that for myself, right? Secondly, what was the weather like? Was it really hot? Was my brain not working? All these things. It kind of relates to, I was explaining to Edgar earlier today how Egyptian architecture and Roman, we're about to go to Rome, is different because Africa is going under Europe. So Africa has sandstone, so it has to be chunky. That's why pyramids are chunky. Everything there is chunky. Otherwise it collapses. But because it's pressing into Northern Europe, you have granite and not granite, you have marble and other construction materials, right? So the pressures that make things possible become interesting. And I'm not just going on a huge tangent. I'm talking about, Alan working on his drawings. What are the different kind of pressures, different kind of motivations that go into that to provide the information, and how can we extract it in the future over mute?
That's really interesting. One thing that strikes me as a potential issue with encoding all of the data is the presence of personally identifying information, or PII, within the context of your survey results. In
You're
your
such an
particular
Apple
cases.
man. You're such an Apple man, in a good way.
Well, it's baked into every level of our decisions, particularly on places where there are substantial risks from not doing that kind of thing. But no, but it is a really valuable thing to do, to be able to give people the working as it's sort of determined to be allowable. So that's really cool. Yeah, I was doing the same thing with my daughter this weekend, kind of pointing out to her that by virtue of having more or less unfettered access to an iPad, it means that she can read, but also sort of drop down rabbit holes in Wikipedia for a particular kind of subject material, and enrich the entire experience by being able to say, read Nancy Drew Mysteries, and then go, Rumbleseed, what's a Rumbleseed? And then look up at the Wikipedia article and go, oh my God, no wonder those are banned now. And look at Google Images to see all of the range of things that are there. So it's a really cool thing to be able to do. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, having data as visual meta is useful. What it's not clear to me is, by consequence of it being present in visual meta, what is the sort of appropriate generalized runtime that has the ability to consume it, to compose the views that you described, because the visual meta is no longer then opinionated about the one specific appearance. I'm aware that PDF actually does contain a runtime such that it would have the ability to do the scripting for it, but it's probably not recommended. So yeah, no, it's cool, but it opens the questions of like, where does this run? What do you trust to do that work for you?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Absolutely. Leon, please.
Okay, I'm just going to throw in this crazy idea. Maybe in a PDF sense it can be useful, or in Alan's scanning work or recognition work. I posted just an Amazon product of a multicolor pen. How crazy would it be if you would that the author, when writing something, would basically tag or give the thing he's writing a certain purpose for the scanner, or for later parsing, or in a similar sense, how crazy would it be if you could just write a piece of text with some numbers and colors, and then based on the colors, it could construct some kind of small spreadsheet visualization from that, or return it back to text, sort of I was just thinking about if text is the lowest common denominator between spreadsheets and human verbal text, then maybe this whole color idea of Freud might come into the picture again.
We're on the same page. One of the fun things about the paper experiment is I have these stickers, and I have them of different sizes, and so like in this case, blue is book, red is author, I think green is idea, I don't remember what yellow is right now, which is a whole different funny lesson. But yeah, so I put these all over the page as they kind of fill up, and it has a couple of interesting knock-on effects. One, it would, if I could get it to read the text accurately, then it would be like, okay, this thing that I just read, I know now is a book, and this thing that's right next to it, or blue, this thing that's right next to it that I also read that has a red sticker is author. So now I'm going to make an assumption that this is the author of this book. Boom, goes into a table, right? It's not as quick as using a pen, right? Because it's still a separate process. But yeah, it's definitely thinking along the same lines. And it's interesting because I don't know if I brought this up before, but that was really what made me feel what I think is a big paradigm problem with HCI or with digital primitives, and that is, or anything dealing with data, because these tools were made for formal systems and made by engineers. There's a presumption of the logic that is used should be global, right? Whereas when I was putting these stickers down, I messed up the schema in my head. You know, one day it was like books were red and authors were blue, right? And oh, that would screw up a normal conventional system. But why can't we have local logic? So like logic that is scoped to Freud and Malta might use a syntax a different way, you know, because he's just feeling this way, right? And let the area sort of let it be understood that this is like, you know, casual talk. This is how he's associating things right now. So I'm going to take whatever he wrote and or me the AI and still figure out on my own what I think, where he's trying to be consistent, you know. But if it's not completely consistent with the system that I know, it's not going to throw errors because I can still like, to reframe this. I think it's more important to be able to differentiate rather than identify. So this is different than that, not that this is X and that is Y. You know what I mean? And I don't know that we have many systems that do that aside from tab to insert, you know, like hitting tab in a text editor. That's a great way, or, you know, ... space, whatever, those kinds of like informal systems that we have that are basically just for our own minds to say like, this is not the same line of thought. I'd like to see more of that. Different point. Yeah.
That goes into a really deep-seated human thing, and that is multiple choice is always easier than just coming up with an answer if it's not something you know super well. You know, recognition is stronger than recall.
Totally.
Right, so you see the difference. I just want to briefly show you almost the opposite. Here we are in a good old-fashioned author. So the thing that I talked about again and again now happens. If I now do a keyboard shortcut to hide a selection, so now I've chosen to hide all the people. And the people, I'm not using colors, but I am using typeface. So they're all italic, because as I said before, it looks like a signature. But the point of that, having the selection, is imagine this is a real mess. And to now make them into a column or a horizontal thing or whatever I want, it's really faffy. And this is really a Brandl thing, because here I'm thinking how to do this in VR, just starting with a small screen. So what we've done is when you hide and then bring it back, they're all selected. And it's such an important thing because now I can do this. It's just the normal keyboard shortcut for horizontal centering. And I've got control of these little guys. Right? If I want to do layouts, I can do horizontal H. You know, they don't go up on a line, but they go,
yeah,
right? So these things are now possible to play around with.
That's really cool.
Right.
No, it's really interesting because it sort of reminds me of the difference in sophistication between sort of layout and alignment tools present in Adobe Illustrator, and versus, you know, the modern tools for thought, and the way that if you have sophisticated alignment and arrangement tools, they can be used for the visual sort of practicalities of being able to have, you know, anchor your spacing with equal gutters in such and such a place, and make sure that your print layout works. But I use Illustrator as a tool for thought, and it's really funny to see that as that sophistication and the benefits of those sophistications, and being able to come up with much more spatially nuanced representations of how to partially apply those constraints and things jumps out at me as an opportunity.
I
use
really think Figma could be an amazing tool for thought in
I
a
use
similar way.
Keynote. I think Keynote is the best.
Yes.
But
Yeah, most prototypers at Apple do as well. There was a really great talk by Jeffrey Traer Bernstein called "Prototyping: Fake It Till You Make It," where it's unfortunately not online for the public anymore. But he builds just a ton of stuff, like exclusively in Keynote, to prototype how a device might work in the future. And it's a long-held tradition for the people who are the most innovative with thinking about what a product even is, to be using the coarsest tools among them all. So that's fun too.
Fantastic.
I'm leaving the screen up just for a few more seconds to show particularly Alan the choice of categories that I have here, because when you're talking about colors, it's what you choose, and there is kind of a limit to how many categories you can have within your primary set, so to speak, before you go into more esoteric. And the way we identify them here, you see this is a data build, so it's a question mark. But so you can choose how they look. So you have something. So you have italic, I was told it, bold, location, institute, bold, italic. I'm sure we could do more. But obviously what's also exciting is that if each one of these could have more than one thing, right? Then you can start having color dots next to each other, and you could almost do like a offset printing effects, where you have many colors producing a new color, and that then you go into color theory of how you get color mixing and all of that stuff, and that could really go into perception. But then, of course, there are people with different kinds of color deficiencies, which would have a whole set of different issues.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you can do there is just generically array all of the available parameters to a given that are legible to a given user. So some people might be able to use movement, some people might be able to use scale, and other people may be able to discern even greater color distinctions and things like that. So on the basis of that, you give them that palette of available options, and they can kind of color as they will with it. Something I was really interested in and wanted to sort of go into more is the locality of those semantic highlights that you suggested, Alan. I think that's really, really interesting in terms of having the ability to have, I was looking to see if they call it ONTIC, but semantic drift, certainly, where you have definitions, and in your case, Frode, like those are reasonable global kind of characterizations and tags. But in the context where you have a very long document or a very long map, having the ability to have those things shift over time, and to be able, to be able to explicitly or implicitly delineate within these bounds in this context, then I use this color to mean this thing versus that color, and also being able to kind of show the distance, the geographic distance through a linear text from the last use of a particular color and things like that, in order to identify that this palette is largely free because it doesn't seem like this tag has a lot of relevance anymore. Would be an interesting thing to be able to do, to be able to go like, well, it looks like grade's free because you're not talking about institutions anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And it would to a conventional system, it would just look like a mess. But I think that's one of the ways that some sort of small AI could really open the doors to newfound flexibility, like just naturally the way that we think, or a little bit closer to the way that we think.
Oh, sorry, off topic. Just remember, Brandel, do you happen to be using a 27-inch monitor, Apple one, right now?
Right now, no. I'm using my laptop at home.
Because I'm traveling, a big adventure, could you do you have one at work in the office? Could you please take a screenshot of it just empty and email me? Because in terms of reading the screen size, my program is having a bit of an issue, and I only have my laptop on this trip. If you remember, if not, it's really not important. But sorry, we're talking about scales and stuff, right?
Yeah, no, it's like 5,300 pixels, reporting at 2x.
Yeah,
But
he knows that, but there was something about scaling that still didn't make sense, and he was worried, and I don't know. He's very clever, so this.
5120 by 2880, and I think that it reports at just 2:1, so that it is actually whatever 2560 or
hang on.
something. Oh, okay.
Okay, it's please repeat the numbers. It's
5120 by 2880. And in Safari and native applications, that reports as 2560 by 1440 with a
hang on,
nominal device pitch.
2560 by
1440
okay.
with a device pixel ratio of 2 at default zone. I'll confirm, but yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. So here's a question, guys. Yeah, Leon, please go first.
Oh yeah, to finish up your author demo, what I really liked is the your shortcut keys. I was immediately reminded of Vim. It's a text editor of a very, very old one. The author just passed away. It was in the news last week. But interesting thing about this text editor is that the key bindings were pretty precise, and they were not user configurable. It was a B to go to the beginning of the text, E to the end of the text, and they were sort of, it became archetypes in the computer world. So now a lot of computer editors, code editors, they have an option called, what kind of bindings do you want? Do you want Vim bindings? And it's very interesting that maybe what you are doing with author is also these key bindings are almost a product on it, or a product sort of an archetype on itself, and it would be maybe also useful to not only show it in author itself, but maybe also on the future of text websites, because I don't think there is really a sort of standard key bindings for working with links and nodes. Is there, perhaps? Do you know?
That's
Big
Not something
question. There's all kinds, but I love that
Yeah.
suggestion there. That made me, when with Frode's demo, I was thinking, like, how cool would it be to have an understanding that you can rearrange the elements, but you're not necessarily really rearranging the elements, right? It's almost like you have a different version of rearrangement, right? So to the key binding, if you hit like A, and then it was understood that all the authors would then go to the left, and all their links would be retained, but and then if you hit B, all the books would like size up, like how, and that doesn't have to mean that it rearranged everything that was actually the way that you had it. It was like a modal space, pocket universe, to go in and redefine things and then jump back into where you're at.
Oh my God, Randall's in the Vision Pro right now, mentally, saying if it can.
How did you know?
Your face. What you're talking about, all of you right now, I think is super, super important. I don't think.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I do, because I don't think what's happening in author is that advanced. I'm very grateful, Leon, for you saying it in that way. But you remember games like Command and Conquer, games where you have lots of troops on the field, right? You could select a bunch of troops, assign a keyboard shortcut to them, and then you do that keyboard shortcut, you would get them back. So when I was attacking my brother, I would do a unit of helicopters and guns and blah, blah, blah over here, keyboard shortcut this and this, and another one over there. When they got to the right place, I selected them both and tried to kill him. He usually won. But the point is that to be able to do that kind of a layering, which a layering by arbitrary type as well as by category type, is really, really important, because VR, as we talked about for the last few sessions, is so messy easily. So we really need to develop these commands and to see Brandel looking at what kind of things can be mapped. I mean, I'm thinking about something along the lines of what Fabien was doing with the cube on his hand. You know, you don't want to have to, keyboards shortcuts in VR are fine. Of course they are for certain uses, but you also want to be able to move around a thing and to do that. These
You guys
are,
had me going. I thought Brendel was actually had the helmet on, and we were seeing a simulation of his face, and I was like, okay, that's amazing.
that's what happened.
I
That's
saw
why
you drink
it's
coffee.
so
and I'm like,
blurry.
okay, no way.
Yeah, no, because what Leon is saying is the interactions we invent now will be what will be used in the future. If we do anything successful, like soft space that EU
Right.
has been doing, right? These are the things that are going to be around for a very, very long time if they become successful.
On that note, I totally agree with that, and that's actually I've been working a little bit more on this idea of the 23 problems for HCI,
Oh,
and
thank you.
they are I'm kind of thinking of them in terms of one, micro problems and problems with primitives. So micro problems in the sense that they're problems that I've experienced, and I cannot say that, you know, maybe in another discipline they've been solved, or, you know, it's certainly possible in another domain it's not even an issue. It's an issue for me. So, you know, like scoping it down that way. And then a problem with primitives in the sense that they aren't even at the level of not at the level of apps or products. They may not arguably even be at the level of UX, because a lot of times these things go totally unnoticed, right? Like we've already become conditioned by technology, so we don't notice them as problems, so they wouldn't crop up in any sort of UX research per se, unless it was really well done. But I'd love to chat about that some more and get I don't know, like anyone who wants to add fuel to it. I listed out a whole bunch, and then I'm kind of trying to figure out where they connect. One other quick thing I was thinking about doing as a newsletter or related, and so just a very impersonal poll or a quick poll. If I did a newsletter, would it make sense to do it under like Alan Laidlaw, or would it make sense to do it under something different like Little Man? Is that
future of text, obviously.
It's going to be about other stuff than
I know. I just had to say that.
yes.
But before, let us linger on that question, because I have a little comment. You used interaction design and HCI, those terms. I think they should be thrown in the toilet, because what we're dealing with, especially when we go from paper into virtual space, HCI term is really old-fashioned. It's not about how to design menu systems. It's very much more about information interaction. You know, when you can literally reach out and touch a word or a symbol or whatever, and then apply things to it. I think we need a different language. I think we are very much in the Don Norman days. Don Norman, Don Nielsen, all these guys, they did good stuff, but that's not the world anymore.
Yeah,
So
well, with
all I
HCI,
want-
it's interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all I wanted to highlight.
HCI is interesting because it's agreed that it was a term that, much like many other terms, was appropriated and turned into a kind of a different thing than it originally was. I mean, you could say the same of critical theory. Was actually critical of theory when it started out, but it's been, I don't know, languishing for so long that it might be time to reappropriate it or something, in the same way that like cybernetics in the 70s was kind of you know, no one wants to, that's old hat, but now it's interesting again.
Right. But even in the 90s on my websites, I was saying we don't interact with computers, we interact through computers, which is, of course, an important difference. As for the naming, my vote is to use your name and build you as a brand, not some other thing. I don't know. What do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I'm inclined to go that way. If you want to make sure that you get in rooms, then to tell people about things, then you need to make sure your name comes along with your ideas.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
On the HCI front, I can definitely concede that, because honestly, when I think about it more precisely, it's more like problems with digital or problems with the logic that is a result, or the logic that created digital, might say digital logic, the logic that's necessary to code things.
But
And so
Alan,
it's,
you of all
yeah.
people, it's not about digital. It's also paper.
Well, no, you misunderstand. I'm saying there are potholes or snags or frictions that occur when we have to interact with digital. And if I were to build out the hypothesis a little bit more, it'd be like computers were invented for command control kind of problems, right? And even after that, they were used for business problems, which are very similar. Businesses are very much like computers. They follow, similar kind of logic, at least in the digital domains. And so these kinds of problems don't really crop up until you want to use computers for creative things, for actually like augmenting intelligence when you're not as concerned with output. These are the kinds of problems that I'm trying to pinpoint. And that
I would dispute that computers were.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I would dispute that computers were invented for command and control. I would say that they were invented for two completely disparate things, which is command and control and data processing, and that they are there's a full vertical rift running right the way through all sort of 75 years of computing as a result.
Excellent point. Yes, I was kind of putting that command and control as because it's the more novel of the two.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, but you're right. Data processing and command and control. Yeah.
But it's one of those really neat things where interesting things to realize that there's this fundamental rift running right the way through the entire chronology of computing as a consequence of people failing to recognize the contradiction between the sort of the metaphors and the results that sort of flow out of them. Similar to that, I'm reading a neat book at the moment. Sorry, I'll wait.
No, please go on to that more and even go more into the rift, because I have my ideas of the rift you're talking about, but I may not.
Name a book, please, and comments, please.
Yeah, it's called The Immersive Enclosure, A History of VR in Japan, and it's a sociological inquiry into all of the sort of the precedents in America and Japan about what VR comes from, how it's conceived, what it's for, as a result of American militarism, as a result of Japanese denunciation of militarism, and all of the different social factors related to population density and people's responses to the oil shock of '73, which turns out to have been an important point in 20th century history. So it's cool. Sorry, I said I would not talk about it because I wanted Leon to talk. It's a great book, though.
Thanks. Well, I don't know if it's related, but when first Alan gave this definition of command and control, followed by the dispute, then I was thinking, well, I would also like to dispute, because, well, I was thinking, do we actually know what computers are for? And maybe this is also what Freud is hinting at, that, yeah, we start these HCI kind of studies based on what we think computers are used for and what we think they will be used for in computers. But yeah, if I also look back at my own childhood, for me, it was only later when I already made friends with the computer that I realized that computers, I read about computers that they are used for number crunching and the DARPA and military. I had no idea about it, but it's pretty bizarre how that was not my experience. Like when I did not know anything about when I was just a child living with my parents, I had a completely different idea about what a computer is for. It was for fun and for creating things. And yeah, I'm just curious, maybe I want to bounce the ball back to Freud. Do you think this is also the reason why we should drop HCI, since maybe the networking we should look it through a networking lens or communication lens instead of a computer talking to a computer lens?
I had to update my commercial website, the one for author and reader, a couple of years ago, and to not just do my own design and to get a bit of distance, I hired someone through a friend to help design it. And this person's language was so absurd, I just couldn't deal with it. So we didn't do much. It's important to do this kind of language. We must do the wireframing and to make sure that above the fold, it's been mechanized to a point that is completely unthinking. I'm sorry to say it's a bit similar to watching Hamilton live, the show. It's my favorite thing ever, the original cast recording, but to see it in the West End, it's so much we're going to do a la la la. It becomes just a thing to do, right? And I think HCI, when I started out with Doug and all these people, it was early days. It was like, here's this thing. It's new to me. Obviously, I'm not that old. But what can we do? We got to understand the computer to make things. Now we're at a point where our watches, for crying out loud, have more processing capacity than was in the entire world when I was born. Right? There is a watch face on the Apple Watch. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's called, I forget what it's called, but it's got the globe in the center and you tap it, the whole globe in 3D rotates to show a different view on a freaking watch face. It's so advanced now and our opportunities are so extreme. My son now has gotten into Harry Potter, lots of issues there, both in terms of the author and the story. But him and his friend are down by the pool now doing all kinds of spells. I'd much rather we look at this as magic, quite, Alan Kay style magic. What we can actually do if we apply our imagination to this, and this is why I'm so grateful for Alan's weird perspectives and particularly insisting on bringing paper into it. It is not human-computer interaction. It's idea interaction. It's thought interaction. And what substrates can we use in the world to paste an idea onto, and how can we see the relationships? This is really, really fundamental to human thought and human experience and who we are. I've been writing recently about who are we with AI? Who do we want to be with AI? It's also who do we want to be in VR? We need to decide on this. And it's not about pressing buttons, keyboard shortcuts, resolutions, got nothing to do with that. It's got nothing to do with the device at all. It is entirely about the stuff in here, the stuff in there, and this. Sorry, that wasn't.
Oh yeah, that was no. That's an awesome clarification. Something that the reason why I brought up the Japan book is because while I was in Japan and while I was reading that, it has a lot about the etymological roots of words in various places and what that actually sort of reveals about the way we think about it. And we were talking, my daughter and I, about digital currency versus electronic, like paper money versus electronic money and all of those things, and how actually, so we call it electronic because it's to do with the flow of electrons being representative of things. But actually, it doesn't matter that it's electronic. What it matters is that it's symbolic. And so like that symbolic manipulation and representation is a crucial component of these things. Even so, we also use digital, and digital means fingers, and we use calculus. But calculi are little stone, and like they mean their own things now, but they came from that, and it's phenomenal to kind of be kind of forced back into recognizing what those etymological roots really are for what we're really talking about, and to think about what is really germane about that concept with regard to how it's being provided to us. Because yes, it's electrical. Yes, it's numerical. Yes, you can conceive of it as digital, but what really matters is that it's fundamentally symbolic. Yeah. And I thought that was a really fun. Oh wow, you're really high up. A really interesting distinction in terms of what is actually important about this sort of digital stuff and digital mediation and things like that, because actually that could become, if somebody comes up with a better term, pretty hackneyed. Be like, yeah, so it's coming through digits and numerical representation. Who gives a shit? Like what actually it means is that it has this barrier of like fundamental symbolism rather than having a specific analog in the sense of being required to be directly analogous to the specific situation. So yeah, analog versus digital versus analog versus symbolic. I don't know. I think it was just an interesting kick to be on in terms of what is the most essential component of why this is different and what this medium and this discipline, to your point, Frode, actually is.
Yeah, I mean, that is why the future of text exists, because Doug Engelbart referred to it as symbol manipulation. And text is just the very tip of the iceberg and the most extreme part of that. And it's the part that needs the most hand-holding because it's mostly ignored. But all these other things are completely related to that. When we talk about colors and shapes and all that stuff, yeah. To me, that is really what it's about. And I wouldn't say analog versus digital because I don't think that divide exists anymore. I read many years ago that you have to have a certain amount of H2O molecules for them to behave like water. Right. For some reason, I think it's a small number, like 7, to have water interactions with the molecules. I think it's the same. Once you get it beyond the threshold of digital information, there's nothing digital about it. It
Yeah.
behaves for all intents and purposes as something analog.
That's
Yeah,
a very.
I was watching
Go ahead.
I was watching the most recent Adam Curtis documentary, first episode last night, and there's a reindeer herding at some point in it, and the reindeer are behaving very much like a fluid, because there are just so many of them, and it doesn't make sense to model them like reindeer if you're trying to talk about the paths they're traveling. They are a fluid, and yeah, I was incidentally also wondering like, what makes water be like water, and so it is interesting for people to get down to the molecular level to see the limits of when it sort of starts to be water-like, because there has to be a point at which it is
All right,
not.
so I still want to get back to the Rift, but and it's thank you for mentioning the immersive enclosure. I actually had downloaded that book a while ago and I never even opened it up. So now it's on my list. The dynamic here is interesting because I think about, what to me analog corresponds to continuous, so fluid, and digital is discrete. To say that it's no longer digital because there's so much of it, where I have, I think, a tension with that is the tools that are made for us to use are still very thoroughly discrete in their design principles. Even a tool for thought like a block editor, a block is treated as a water molecule as opposed to treated as a you can't make blocks into a fluid. You can't make
Yes, you can.
tags into a fluid.
Yes, you can.
So
yes, you can.
what am I missing
Well,
there?
there was the promise of fuzzy logic many years ago, and people talk about neural networks as.
Sorry, I want to show you how you can see.
Oh, Frode, your
see that
connection's really bad.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
No, I was just going to show you
Fuzzy logic.
Right. Well, Malta itself is literally Minecraft's. It's built out of large stones cut from the ground here. But you wouldn't say that the buildings here are digital for that reason, right? You can absolutely make blocks digital. Excuse me, blocks smooth and fluid. I think it comes down to just volume.
You're breaking up.
I was finished. Sorry, I was being quiet for once.
Yeah, we're not getting any of that. Well, it's gotcha. It's interesting. I get that digital and analog can be troublesome to try and make a distinction between our Tayloristic modern way of doing things as being digital, and the sort of like the natural Emersonian way of being is analog. That's tricky.
Yeah. Well, I think the hard edgedness. Oh, sorry, Leon, I didn't see.
Oh yeah, just one thing about the fuzzy logic stuff. I was also thinking like, why are we not why are we not using that? What was so bad about it? And I also tried to use it for some clients, and I realized that there's a lot of fear connected to not having a sort of binary thinking computer or worker working for you, which makes especially business people feel very insecure if they cannot really easily reason reason about them for themselves. Like they cannot reproduce it in their brains, and with binary thinking it seems it's a bit easier to agree with the outcome. Anyways, that was just my few cents on the
Totally. Well, and that totally gels with, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Dennett, but he's a neat philosopher, and he goes and berates Google every now and again. They do talks at Google, and he sort of tells them off for creating formalisms that people can divest responsibility to. And yeah, it's what you're saying about sort of the confidence, the institutional confidence in hard-edged formalism, no matter how wrong-headed, is a really important component of that. What people really want is formalism, certainty, bureaucracy, some kind of formal closure over a decision that absolves them of specific and individual responsibility in a way that I think sort of computers tend to currently satisfy, but definitely, like, if Kafka is to be believed, and probably a bit, then certainly predates the advent of digital computers. Like, people have created horrific logical formalisms that have just crushed people between their gaps
Yes.
well before computers existed. So,
Yes.
like, it is a problem that is particularly sharpened by computing and by these digital systems, these things with hard edges and enclosures over categories and determinations. But like, that's why I say software as bureaucracy sped up. But yeah, like, different sort of representations have the ability to do different things if you start to deconstruct what the benefit and the function of a representation within a system is, and why I really think that sort of that thought exercise of what is the best object-oriented representation of money is a really critical one, because you go like, is it that somebody has money or not? Is it that somebody has a certain number of dollars? Is it that somebody needs to have dollars in currency values? Is it that somebody needs to have information about the particular sort of vintage of a particular banknote? Because all of those things have validities for different circles and different functions. Is it to do with the sort of the nature of the promises that somebody had to make in order to get that money? And then you have something like a MapLight, which is the politics tracker in the United States. So yeah, like there's no one objective correct representation, and each representation sort of provides implicit obligations and certain sort of shortfalls in terms of what is likely to be captured conceptually as a result of that codification and formalization. Yes, I need to read All Data Are Local. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, thanks for this, Daniel Dennett. I will look him up.
So, Alan, what is the 23 article title again?
Oh, at the moment, it's just, I was thinking about it in terms of 23 problems, 23 primitive problems, and kind of just sketching, taking time with, like, just picking one. It doesn't have to be comprehensive. It's not saying that there are only 23 problems, but here are 23 that can be picked out. I I've there's a range of topics that it can cover, a range of large themes. The idea would be that I mean, ideally they would start out with particular problems, like a pothole, a friction, and then use that to kind of like discuss, what's going on behind it, and could there be another alternative, right? And so some of them are probably pretty obvious, like having to decide on your health insurance if you live in America. There's a if your company provides health insurance, you still have to go through a pretty rigorous process of filling out forms. A lot of the problems, and I think this is maybe the point, it's not to solve them. It's not, so it's totally different than David Hilbert's 23 problems, because these problems are not falsifiable, they're not solvable, they're really just for conversation. And a lot of the problems, the way I'm kind of scoped them out so far, they really do need a lot of work on how to best describe them. But they tend to, like Brendel pointed out, they tend to reveal echoes in our nature that were around long before computers, right? So one example is simple semantics in language, right? Like you could imagine a situation where there's a project at a company. It doesn't have a physical structure because it's a project, it's a protocol or something, platform, and it has a code name, right? And its code name is Jupyter. And so if someone asks, what is Jupyter? Then someone could hear that and answer, okay, I need to give them a general description of the aboutness of Jupyter so they understand it, right? But they could just as easily be asking, what is Jupyter, in the sense of where is Jupyter located as references in all the documentation throughout the enterprise, right? So it might be better phrased as, where is Jupyter? But that's an example of not even a computer problem, it's a language problem, but it is definitely frustrated by the formalities, the hard edges, the ways that we encode all our work, that typically the simple thing like that winds up taking a week's amount of effort for a person to get the answer. That's a poor description, but you get the gist, maybe.
Yeah, I get the gist, and I love the gist. Because you've called it different things. At one point, it was 23 problems with text, which I think you've generalized a little bit away from. I just put a book, since Randall reminded me of Daniel Dennett. He wrote a book on intuition pups. So these are kind of philosophical tricks to help you think, which seems related, not the same, but related. But I'm wondering, since we're not talking about just philosophical considerations, it seems we still are, and you are, Alan, talking about how to interact with these things, deal with these things. Maybe write many titles for this, like 23 issues with thoughts, with concept, with thinking, with connecting, with communicating. Because one of the things in one of the papers for this year's Hypertext Conference is Mark Anderson and Dave Millard's paper, 7 hypertexts, not 7 problems with 7 hypertext. And the two that I think are so relevant and such a big, and this is very much like Randall talked earlier about the different paths of what computing is interactions as a tool for thought and interactions to present something for consumption. They're very different things, and they often get conflated. And and this is, I think, so important to what you're talking about. If you're talking about your own private thinking space, that's one thing. If you're thinking about a collaboration space, that is something different. If you're thinking about thinking in order to produce artifacts for someone else to understand your thinking, it's yet something else.
Yes. And it's also a fallacy to say that it's a fully distinct thing, which is where it gets really messy. Because it is something else, but it's also something of the same thing, right? It's like a different aspect on the same data.
Well, what are you trying to do? Let me ask this question. Alan, you're the guinea pig here because you kind of represent the community. What's the point of all this? Is it to learn more about plate tectonics, how to save the world, how to be a better person, generalized knowledge, how to communicate, how to win an argument? What are the kind of person you want to augment to become something?
Well, that's an excellent question, Frode. I have an answer for you. One is that these problems are typically what I would call one-dimensional problems, in the sense that, everything that is, for lack of a better term, digital, has to be currently reduced down to a single string or something, which is incredibly portable, right? But like a document is can include rules of how the document is structured, and aesthetics, but all of that gets reduced down to a single string. So these are kind of like one-dimensional problems, and I paint it that way because if these problems are in fact problems and they're not addressed, I think that they are the kinds of problems that will reveal themselves in 3 dimensions and greater. They'll keep replicating if they can't be solved in the smallest of dimensions. That's not always true. The other side of it as to why now is that we have this operational kind of AI at our fingertips that we're still trying to understand what it's about. Now might be a good time to refresh and look at what have been maybe some hurdles of, which includes history of, the conventional programming paradigm. Can we use AI to soften some of these hard edges now, or we may find that AI actually just exacerbates it even more because it's part of the same system. Does that answer the question?
No,
Yeah, I think that's
no.
okay.
It was really interesting to hear, but I really want to know, pretend you're a teacher and a software designer and all of that stuff, and you have a huge budget and to build such a thing. Someone who uses it, what kind of person would they become?
This is not a thing to be built, so I'll take another stab at it. This is going on a optimistic belief that the next 10 years of software development will be unrecognizably different, and the idea of products, the idea of apps, these things might slide away in this new paradigm, right? And these problems aren't even about evangelizing what the new paradigm could be, but it's kind of like, hey, if we get to a point in the next few years where we're really questioning everything, let's at least put these couple of items up for a vote and see which ones are addressable.
So a really fantastically important thing you're talking about is the multidimensionality aspects.
Yes.
But let's say, okay, it's not something to be built. I hear that. But let's say you had to choose a community to augment first. What kind of people would it be? Who would you go to? Would it be politicians? Would it be the military, education, independent thinkers, etc.?
Well, I also want to hear what other people have to say with all of this, by the way, because I'm just throwing out opinions left and right. The one that I'm closest to is, getting the thoughts out without an interest in so much output or the final form of it. But another particular pain point is the seductive problem of documentation in the enterprise, which is just a gnarly beast because you also have a culture that supports the way to do business. But it seems like one, that all the AI promises for sorting shit out when it comes to enterprise knowledge management will not bear fruit. But at the same time, it also feels like, wow, this should be easier.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you talk about this. And yes, please go on. Please, Leon.
Yeah, I think I was maybe Brendel. You wanted to say something before me without raising your hand? No? Okay, I will continue. I was thinking that if you have these 23 problems, Hilbert's-like problems, maybe you shouldn't worry about Freud's question, because I was just thinking, if you put one question in there which is already half solved for 50% or being solved by some big companies, then it could be just a very simple phrase like 23 problems for to prevent bullshit startups. There are so many bullshit startups focusing on really stupid ideas. Then if there is one in these problems, and it could be a great focus for a lot of startup money to focus on some really interesting new areas, instead of trying to create the new Airbnb for boats or that kind of just that's just my thoughts.
That's an excellent point. I should have added that like I have in mind a follow-on contingent or whatever, which is not necessarily solutions to the problems, but they're like opportunities specific. Like I want to separate out if I can identify what the core problems are when I read an ebook, and what is it that I want to do, what's the feeling there, what do I feel is missing, I want to separate that out from, here's some things I'd love an ebook to do, but I have a list of those things as well, right? Like here's what I think, here's how copy paste should work, here's or here's a way, here it would be awesome if screenshots were the entire OS, and like we were just like screenshot first for everything, and here's why that could be interesting, right? So the questions are kind of like intuition pumps, and that they will hopefully lead to, here's some different ways of doing things. Anyway. Randall, go ahead if you have anything.
Well, one of the things that your 23 questions sort of reminded me of is the way in which I strongly feel like all of the sort of the technical solutions to problems that we have arrayed in computing today are vastly more historically and ecologically contingent. They're path dependent in a way that I think belies what would be the best based on what we know we have today. And so, what if everything is screenshots is a really neat sort of Omar Rizwan style provocation of, like, given now I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. Again, like you said, sort of based on perennial problems, to go like, well, what's the right solution now? And to be able to say like that it was the right solution when video memory cost, like, the Alto, half of the cost was the video memory of the currently sort of approximately $87,000. And so now that video memory is too cheap to count, how do you just simply array the dollar cost in best pursuit of human needs would be a very different thing. But just like that, there are fundamental problems that people have with selection of a multiple, like of between a fixed number of elements of a certain count versus having multi-choice of 2 or 3 or 4 and things like that. Like those are also things that can kind of should be re-encountered and renegotiated every so often as well.
Excellent. And this reminds me too, I meant to say this earlier, which might change the appearance of this thing quite a bit. What I like about Hilbert's 23 problems is that he didn't invent all of those problems. Those were problems that have been around for a long time, and he gathered them together. And so what was unique about the 23 problems is that it was like here's the first time these have been sort of stated in a similar way and all put together. So I would really love it for it not to be Alan's 23 problems, but like 23 problems, brought up by the community. Like I think Brendel, your example of money is a perfect one of these problems, right? It's an intuition pump. It's like, and it is specifically what I like about it is that it can be traced down to like a particular time that this caused a problem.
Alan, I don't fully agree with you there. I don't know if you know, but in the history of hypertext, in the 1987 conference, there is this 7 issues of hypertext. It's become an issue that's been referred to and all of that, and it's named after the guy who did it, Halas, Frank Halas. I don't pronounce his name right, I'm sure. But I think it's really important to take ownership of things. You know, one of the great things about America that I learned later, that all these ownership things in the Constitution, it's not about just owning a piece of land, it's also about responsibility. I think it's really important. So I would much rather refer to Alan's 23 issues rather than some generic, we made it as a thing. Politically, I'm left leaning. But people on the left side of the spectrum are so disorganized. I know it's a joke, right? But if you do this with your name, and yes, sure, give credit to us. If we help you with some, write it in, they're absolutely fine. But there are specific things that happen. And you don't have to be a world-known figure to do it. It may make you a world-known figure. But the thing that I've been begging for the future of text is for great questions. And of course, you should publish this under your own name in your own book. But I would love to have this in the next volume of the future of text. So that in the future, people can refer back and say, have we dealt with any of these issues that Alan pointed out? Use us as your copywriters and editors as thinking, fine. But I strongly feel these should be Alan Laidlaw's 23 issues.
Yeah, I'm definitely for that as well. Like it took me a while to get there, but I've realized that like your name is a thing that like it's useful to have on things for you, but it's also useful to have on things for other people, just as a handle and as a like, no, this is this. And once it's named and once it's sort of thrown into the world as this sort of concretely and well posited thing, then it becomes a much more useful package of ideas to be able to pass around and for people to be able to kind of consider or accept or reject. And it seems like it's a lot to do with you because it's got your name on it, but it's as much about sort of clarifying which imports to use effectively and what the namespace is to be able to kind of deal in that space. So I understand the anxiety around naming something after you, not least if you weren't sort of exclusively responsible for all of the contents of it, but the packaging as an act. My wife is really into outsider art, and that involves a lot of like painting of the mundane of various kinds, it shouldn't surprise you to know that what the art of that is the deciding to make that picture and make that picture of that thing, and that's as much important as the sort of the nominal contents of it being its own thing. So yeah, please call it Laidlaw's 23 questions.
Even though I obviously agree with Brendel, you don't have to go that far. You can just publish, if it's published under your name, 23 issues, it becomes Alan Laidlaw's 23 issues.
Yeah.
Well, then what I might do just to thumb my nose is say, problem number 2, Brandel's math paradox, money paradox, or something. Give the problems their proper credit.
Yeah, no, I would be okay with that. I would want to make sure that nobody else has done something similar enough that we should use theirs instead. But yeah, I like the money one. Because I used to use cats, and people were like, "Why the hell would you want to represent cats inside a system?" So money is a lot better.
One thing
Very
that
good.
relates to just crying out loud motorbike, very small motorbike as well. I asked Emily just for fun the other day, you know, if my goal was to have what I do, crying out loud. All right, can you hear me over that nonsense?
Yeah, it's fine. It's
Okay.
working fine.
Yeah, you know, if I want to be known in the future, should I focus on building systems or writing inspirational philosophical articles? We agreed that it would need to be, in my case, software. The reason for that is doing the system, whether it's in software or as a system, produces an understanding that you won't get from just talking about the thing. And I think you're doing a really good balance of that. It's not just a, you know, be kind, make sure you label everything and all that stuff. You know, there is meat behind it, and that's why it's not just one or two issues, which I think is really good.
Well, thank you all for all of that. We can move on to another topic because that took some time.
It's a really important one though. I've been thinking about it a lot as I live in Silicon Valley, doing arguably, I would argue, one of the more interesting things to the face of the future of computing and one of the most important sites, and just how nothing is actually as fancy as it feels like it will be until you're there. Because I am a product of the late 80s and early 90s in a backwater where we were just had ingrained in us this crushing inferiority complex of like nothing about where we are has any relevance to any of the sort of more central loci of culture and progress and intellectual development and when I get to X, not X as in Google X or X as in Twitter, but just when I get to a given place, then really it'll feel like it's significant and valid. And so, you know, that started as high school and then university and then the capital, Wellington, and then Silicon Valley and Apple. And then from Apple, from out of marketing and communications into the technology development group now, Vision Products Group. And it never has. It's never changed that sense of like, oh, but this isn't really the place, is it? Maybe another real place is around the corner, and it is not. And you know, if anything is going to happen to the future of text, this is as good a place as any. You know, when you say something like, well, I think I'm probably about as smart as Archimedes, then people kind of yes, but that's just because there are no great spaces and there are no great men. And so that means, unfortunately, that we're about as good as it gets.
One of the greatest moments of the future of text was when I was teaching at London College of Communication. And one of the teachers, being a very crusty arts guy, said, after somebody talked about some success story, said, oh, do people only do technology for the money? So I started telling the ARPANET internet story of how, you know, they were undergraduates and they were expected, oh, by the way, Vint, you're in the front row. Would you mind continuing the story? Right. He was there. He was going to speak.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
You know, they were all undergraduates. They expected the adults in the room, like Randall is talking about expecting another department or another company to do it. Companies exist primarily for one reason, and that is to be a company. Countries exist for primarily one reason, and that is to be a country. These organisms, and what I find fascinating is the word organism is defined as something composed of organs. It's almost like a retroactive definition. The number one thing is survival. You know, that's about it. So when you're coming at that tiny, tiny percentage of energy that a society or an organism will use to look into the future, no one has that job really. In some few areas, you know, military safety and so on, whatever you want to call it. But what we're talking about here, the future of thoughts, it's very hard to do because it's very easy to become focused on one tool or one solution and hold the flag for that. So to ask the questions, I mean, I'm very, very glad to be supporting you on this, Alan, because if the future of text is nothing but a great set of questions culled from different sources, including you, success. right? If it's just a dogma, not so much success.
Yeah. A couple of comments. First up, Randall, I still hope to get somewhere around to where you're at. That, I mean, that's, I know it may not feel like much that you're there, but it's still pretty inspiring. When you're
It feels
comment,
like both at once.
what's that?
It feels like both at once. It feels like everything and nothing.
Your comment about your origins reminded me of a great point in All Data Are Local that was, we're all familiar with Nicholas Negroponte, who headed up MIT Labs, and his big manifesto or initiative to give every child a computer. And one of the points in the book that came from another study, but it was just really well put, that the principles behind the idea is that people are agents of change. And that's good. But with the idea of providing them a computer, which would augment their, speed up their ability to be an agent of change, is that it wasn't a change that was interested in the local. It was cutting through the local. So data and computers are universal, even though we treat them as universal when in fact they're highly cultural. By giving a child in Africa a computer, it's saying you don't have to live in your locality anymore. You can enter into the universality of the digital domain, which is a pretty wild way to, I don't know, get at that kind of dynamic, which is sort of gotten more in our face since the web. The feeling of, oh, I'm this far away from that over there. Anyway, one of the first problems, and what's fun about this, is that the hardest part is figuring out how to actually frame it and if the problems are real problems. But the first one I'm thinking of is that everything in the conveyance of information is a tree structure, right? Or essentially nested, right? Is there any alternative to the nest or the tree, which is a weird thing? And I'd love to get thoughts and critiques on this, but like when we write on paper, I don't write in a tree-like structure. When we write on computers, it's funny because the gravity is like, at the top left. It has its own gravity and it's at the top left. And if you're going to push away from the gravity, you have to add words, and that seems to be a primitive, that seems to be a core principle of dealing with computer interfaces, is that it's going to fold down to one tree and that there's going to be this top left coordinate. The top left is harder to get around because we've been writing that way, forever in Western civilization. But the tree one, is there an alternative to the tree structure that is just as portable? Does that question make sense? Is there anything I can look at to
Yeah. Well, so I mean, a tree is like the directory hierarchy and structure is something that that has been a central metaphor as an abstraction over the very long, like effectively infinite linear space of a disk drive, and insofar as it's addressable. One of the interesting things that Gmail sort of came out of the gate with, I don't know if you used it sort of shortly after its launch, but they were like, we don't have folders. Everything is just tags, and you can use tags, and it's just as good, you guys. And everybody hated it because they were used to the overarching metaphor of folders. And so then about 6 months to maybe a year later, they were like, oh, coming now, folders. And they were just tags, but with a different icon. And so things like, I think they even behaved in the same way. They just called it folders for people. They were like, fuck, okay, you guys, folders. fine. But they didn't behave like folders in the sense that things can have multiple tags, and one of the implications of folders is that there's an exclusive one-to-one mapping of things so that they are contained exclusively within one folder or other. So tags is another interesting and fundamental kind of thing. One thing that is interesting about that is the hard delineation of something either possessing this tag or not. And so having the ability to provide weightings for tags and being able to kind of have shadings that are not
weightings and
discrete.
shadings for tags. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
And so that's interesting. But it occurred to me when I went through this thought experiment, probably 15 years ago, is that though like the delineation of it being this tag that has that fuzzy shading is still hard edged, and so having the ability to provide even more fuzziness is an interesting sort of operational goal for a semanticness is being able to kind of have an approximate location and sort of quasi geospatial sort of coordination of things has the ability to provide soft edges and soft boundaries of whether it's this tag or that tag and things like that. And so having sort of coordinates, actual spatial locations within the context of things, be those spatial coordinates having a direct sort of literal geospatial referent, or that you establish a semantic space and then spatialize items within that, and then encode all of those things together and say, like, this is a contingent space, but these are the locations of those things within those spaces. And those can be, explicitly sort of specified as a consequence of somebody deciding to do that, or that they can be through sort of it's things like the principal component of analysis and Word2Vec style representations where you take associations and relations and then you establish the latent space as a consequence. That mapping has the ability to happen both ways, and is sort of fundamentally different. And as we've seen from machine learning, incredibly powerful, because a lot of the time what these learning algorithms are effectively doing is arranging a latent space on the basis of trying to crunch all of these relations between things. So that's an option. I don't know whether there are apt ways of manipulating that space. One of the things that I really like, somebody said recently, is that subsymbolic representation is still symbolic. It just doesn't have any intersubjective meaning, and I think that's a really important point. Subsymbolic representations, as they exist in neural networks, are still symbolic. They just have been stripped of any intersubjective meaning, which means that they don't. But having the ability to kind of impose intersubjectivity back over those raw latent spaces as constructed, these hyperspaces that are sort of drawn on for the purposes of these neural networks, I think is an incredibly interesting, for all of my like antipathy, which I'll freely admit to, for neural networks and AI sort of nominally today, I'm incredibly excited by the idea of being able to really, like, wholeheartedly and two-handedly and whatever ebodyedly, like, intervene on these latent spaces that are at the core of what machine learning is. I think that because of that schism between data processing and control theory, that it's landed in the data processing camp, and I want it back. I want to play with it.
Yes, exactly. Right. So like even thought experiment, if we had an alternate timeline where a document wasn't so much what you do at the top left and push down, which forces to-do lists to be a nest under and has all this rigidness. If it was like there were 6 regions on this thing that we're going to call a page, and wherever you put text, it's going to sort of gravitate to one of those regions, and that'll help you find it later, but they don't have to be contingent on each other. Like, it doesn't have to be this really weird rope ladder that we're forced into.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that tools for thought sometimes do. But one of the challenges that people have with it is that unless you're committed to locality of significance, then you don't have the ability to have particularly robust or opinionated encodings for things. So, a customer relations management system has the benefit of having a pretty closed formalism over the relevant details of something. And so sort of the office gossip of your particular client and whose sister-in-law is sort of bugging somebody about whatever kind of operation that they had or whatever, doesn't have a place inside that CRM. It does have a place inside, a relevant salesperson's actual mind share in order to be able to manage that relationship. But when a tool for thought sort of tries to construct these tags and meanings, they tend to they tend to fall into the trap of believing that they need to be universally relevant as representations and delineations. And so, I think I've heard a lot about standoff, and I think it's really interesting. So I believe standoff has universality as a relatively clear thing, where you have a universal palette of things rather than a local palette, and so that hinders the ability to have a sort of adaptation rather than that universal one.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that what we've talked about today implies that there's some real richness to be found in pursuing locality and being able to kind of determine the foundations of a piece and a place, and to have those be able to kind of shift. Something that, reading about the history of writing from Stephen Roger Fisher and all of the other folks involved, usual suspects, Ogden people, is that that universalism is really great in theory, but people end up with very local contingencies about what things mean and what things are for. And actually Negroponte's computers and what they end up for in a place where they're sort of computationally just as complex. But actually, the living wage is so different there that they can tolerate doing wildly different things with those computers. Is a really interesting and important component of the sort of socio-political landscape of computing as it exists in this sort of quasi-globalized space today. Sorry, that was a lot, Frode. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to bring your attention to the images that I put in the chat. Please tell me when you can view them. You probably have to download them or whatever.
Wow.
So the significance of them is the one that's framed. That's an original first-hand Caravaggio, exciting. But what's really interesting, our friend explained that this is the only Caravaggio that is shown where it was supposed to be seen. So the whole notion of context and experience and relevance and all of that just flows out of it. It's not in a gallery somewhere. And the other picture, there's a crop lower down. What they've done, and this was done in the 15 and 1600s, right? That shadow is fake. Even on the gold, they painted the shadow to give it a 3D effect.
Wow.
Right? So then you get a question of, what is that? Is it supposed to be a sculpture or a person? Is it supposed to be a painting? There's the effect versus technique. There's all these issues that come up that are just so cool. And it's just from a time period and a context I just never think about.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, there's a famous, I don't know how famous it is. There's a painting. Oh, there's a painting of the wife of a pastor or something in the church that my mother-in-law used to teach at. And the woman's face is terribly deformed. And I said, but where's the painting? And because it's like they've got a photo of it in a book, over a door where people would be in pretty significant forced perspective on it. And when you look at it from there, it actually looks okay. And so I wonder, because by the time it was painted in England in the mid-19th, people knew enough about faces, and it actually, it's probably for that foreshortening, and it's really interesting for people to really to build these images with the contingencies of their location and placement, so front and center in mind.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Brandel, because it brings it back to, and Alan, I hope you're there. I hope you can hear us. With the 23 issues, and this is the thing that felt so liberating when I read about when Dave told me about the difference between hypertext for thoughts and hypertext for communication. Right? What you're talking about here, Brandel, is someone creating something for a specific perspective, for a specific point of view. So it's clearly a text or an image for that, which is so different from a tool for thought. So, Alan, what I hope you might do is find a way to separate your issues, because you're going to go absolutely crazy if you try to do everything, because these things are interrelated. But if you find a way to separate, this is the stuff, I don't know what you're going to call it yet, of thinking in your brain, versus this is the stuff that you should try it if you want to communicate with someone else. You can't just let them come in and see your office. It's a mess. This is the stuff of creating a presentation. I know it's obvious, but when I was presented with the difference between hypertext for thoughts and hypertext for communication, it was such a clarity that, like in my own software, author is for thoughts, but it is to produce something to be consumed. Those are not the same jobs as for me making something. And that is why I have maps. That is explicitly for thinking, except when you export. But in my design brain, these things can knock against each other a lot. So to separate, like you said earlier, to discriminate functions as well as these other things is really valuable over.
Part of that I missed, but I think I get the gist.
The key thing I was trying to say, Alan, is concepts, thoughts, tools, text as a tool for thought is one bucket. These same things to communicate with another human or yourself in the future is actually quite different. So when you work
Yes.
on your 23 issues, it may be good to chapterize them along many things, but split these two as different, though related. That's all I'm suggesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a whole. I ideally would like to somewhat loosely categorize the topics. There are some that deal with privacy. There's some that deal with ubiquity. Always on recording. There's some that deals with the outcomes versus like an outcome that is an artifact, which is by and large most of our tools that we use are designed with an artifact outcome in mind or output. So that versus a sparring agent, and I definitely want to be able to make it easy to understand what sort of collection of struggles a particular problem is existing in.
One of the things I realized today walking down to the pool here, Tough Life, is taking responsibility usually means going down at least one more level. If you look at a responsibility for an issue or a problem, if you look at it straight on, it's one thing. But if you want to look at what surrounds it, what makes it happen, or you might call it the root causes, it's hardly ever the thing itself. And I think that your range of issues here really go some way to address that.
Yeah, hopefully.
We're in the last 5 minutes, guys. I'm very grateful for today's conversation, as all of them. This was particularly questionable in the good sense. Not questionable,
Well, there was
questioning.
a talk of would the group be open to using some sort of collaboration document that's free that could just be open on a screen or something while we put notes in there, or is that just too much work and it's kind of improbable?
I think we should try that instead of, and then make the meeting chat illegal for that experiment. I think that is a very good idea. I think we should also think of scripts so that once I upload this, maybe I think Brandel has looked at this before. If I upload this, I write in the comments, started at 6 o'clock GMT or whatever it might be, so that when the YouTube transcript is interacted with or timeline is interacted with from this document, it will automatically go to the right moment in time. There are things we can play around with, and I absolutely think the group would benefit from it. I think we should find a good discussion topic to get some more people in. Not that we need many. We should absolutely do that. The whole dog fooding or testing or whatever. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I think a document would be interesting. I think at other times potentially a Figma document would be an interesting thing to use as well. Like there are a number of things that Figma. No, Miro. I'm thinking of Miro. A Miro board has been a really interesting thing in a more I want to say constructive, but I don't mean. I mean in the sense of with the goal of concretely producing something. It has been an interesting aid for people to throw images in and to be able to kind of group and move them around and stuff like that. And yeah, and Miro again is one of those really interesting tools for thought in that context because it is for arranging. One of the things that it doesn't have the ability to do is to provide constraints, local or global, that pertain to recognizing that there is some value in a loose rigidity to the way that sort of elements are framed. So people have templates for like what goes here, what goes there, but the system doesn't provide support for them. But anyway, yeah, I'm fully on board with both of those things. I just have camera off to save Froda's bandwidth. Yeah.
I'm going to see if I manage to get
the
last minute there, just to say thank you to you guys. Alan, how about you send another email in the same thread saying, pick whatever one, probably Miro, according to Brandel, and say, next week, we're having a test, and this is how you want it to go. Just own the thing. And maybe we can even talk, you choose, but maybe we start talking about some of the 23 issues. Be nice to bunch them up, see how people think, or another topic if you don't want to go into that yet. Entirely up to you, but I think it's a good idea. Leon, you also think it's a good idea? Excellent. Alan, will you do that?
Yeah, the catch is that Miro may require payment for over like 4 people or something like that.
Okay. Send me the information if it's not too bad. I'm happy to try that at least for a month to pay for a group thing. This would be very, very useful.
Yeah, I can look at it too.
Cool. All right. See you guys on Monday. I look forward to the email, Alan, and yes, I mean you should be here. It's not a bad day.
Gorgeous. So gorgeous.
That actually looks all right. Yeah.
One of Emily's very oldest friends from when she was younger than Edgar lives here. She's a violinist in the orchestra, just a master's, going to do a PhD. It's fantastic family holiday. I look forward to seeing you all when we can. And thank you very much for today. Bye, guys. Bye.